This is a Rough Tiger production.
And you, and you, and you, and you were there. Some of it wasn't very nice, but most of it was beautiful.
Are we going?
Yeah, we're going.
Okay.
Radio silence there for a moment. Sorry, folks.
Hi, everyone. We took Labor Day off last week, but we're back with another new edition of Dream Idiots. How you doing, Bryan?
Doing great. Summer is allegedly over, although it doesn't feel like it here. But cool weather is coming.
It got no higher than 62 here today. So
yeah, you can kiss the fattest part of my ass.
Yeah, okay, all right.
Yeah, it's still nice, still way in the 90s here, but I'm jealous. But cool is coming, I hope. Thanks for listening to our stuff. Sorry we were gone for 1 week. That was mostly my fault, actually entirely my fault. But we are back and we'll be here for the long haul for the rest of the year. Thanks for listening and subscribing and sharing our stuff. If you get a chance, please go online, give us 5 stars, shoot us a review. You can find us on dreamidiots.com. We're on Facebook and Instagram at Dream Idiots, and you can drop us a line, dreamidiotspodcast@gmail.com.
Each week, Bryan and I tell each other stories from history, from our own personal lives. Sometimes they're works of fiction. Most of the time they're not. Sometimes they're a combination of both. But we do take turns going first. And this week, since it's episode 81, an odd numbered episode, Bryan, you get to go first. What do you got for us this week?
Well, alrighty. We're going to go back a little bit, way back, episode 17 of this podcast. I talked to you about the Ig Nobel Prize. Back,
right.
March or April or so of last year, so 15 months ago or so. So the Ig Nobel Prize it's essentially a parody event of the Nobel Prize. It's they give out awards in a number of categories, and it's a little bit silly. There is some definite and clear scientific merit to it, but these awards are given out to folks who work in these various fields, and maybe their research, their papers, their whatever they're putting forth has dubious merit. Their sort of slogan is that the Ig Nobel Prize honors achievements that first make people laugh and then make them think. These are genuine, scientists, doctors, writers, etc., in their fields, but some of their work is just a little bit fringy and sort of silly. So way back when we talked about this prize, I think it's sort of hilarious that they do this. It's every year presented on the campus of MIT, and it is every year in September. And I failed to mention this when we came around to last year's event, and so I'm quickly going to talk you through some of the winners of the 2022, just a couple of them, the 2022 Ig Nobel Prize in a couple different categories. Last year, the Art History Prize went to Peter Tripp and Nicholas Helmuth for their study, A Multidisciplinary Approach to Ritual Enema Scenes on Ancient Maya Pottery. So again, sort of funny. The Mayans were big into ritualistic sacrifice and number via capitation. These are things that the scientists dig out of the ground, and someone discovered these guys discovered that that enemas were actually very, very common in the Mayan culture. They actually use enemas to get drunk. One way to do it, and actually are images of enemas being performed in the artwork in their pottery. So these guys were given an award in this category. Last year, the applied.
So it's guys getting blottery on the pottery.
There you go. Yeah. Okay. Last year, the Applied Cardiology Prize went to a whole host of scientists whose names I'm not even going to attempt. But this team of researchers were seeking to find evidence that basically that new romantic partners, why it is that it feels like their heart rates synchronize, and so what is the physiological basis for love at first sight, gut connections, mutual affection, mutual attraction, that sort of thing. And they found that there actually was some actual biological connection there. The literature prize last year was for Eric Martinez.
Wait! Back up! What was the connection? Beyond pheromones, what was it? Any idea?
They
hearts or a love of enemas? What?
A love of enemas. That's what it was. Yes, the authors predicted that successful matches would synchronize. I mean, they just have there was a connection with motor movements. They could correlate the connection. I mean, it is true that in some of the folks that were in this study, that there was a biological sort of synchronicity with heart rate and skin conductance measures, and it was actually experienced. It was more prevalent in with men than with women, but it was definitely something that was measurable. These were couples. They were randomly assigned to each other. These weren't couples that were actually in relationships. But
okay.
Yeah, so it was sort of a blind study, but there definitely was a genuine scientific basis for it.
Okay, gotcha. All right,
gotcha. Okay. In literature, these three, Eric Martinez, Francis Mollica, and Edward Gibson, analyzed what makes legal documents unnecessarily difficult to understand. And it basically seems to advocate, just write these damn things in English. It's the whole terms of use for TikTok that is, 312 pages long, using herein's and to its and the foresaids and okay.
The party of the first part shall acknowledge that the party of the second part.
All that sort of crap. And so it's sort of a silly thing that they dove into, but we're definitely advocating for simpler usage. In biology, these two scientists, Solomeri Garcia Hernandez and Glauco Mercado, studied whether or how constipation affects the mating prospects of scorpions. So there are lots of bugs, insects, amphibians that can lose a tail, can lose a limb. I mean, will give up, an appendage to escape a threat. In the case of this this scorpion, it basically has this portion of the body called the metasomal. It's basically the tail end of the body that includes its digestive tract and its anus, and so it can basically drop the back third of its body in order to escape a predator, but then it means it dies of constipation. And these scientists dove into this field. Okay, interesting.
Did they team up with the first part of the ritualistic enema?
I see the Venn diagram there definitely overlaps. In medicine, again, a whole bunch of Eastern European names here that I will not even attempt. Sorry. But this team of doctors attempted to show that when patients who are undergoing some forms of toxic chemotherapy, some of them suffer fewer harmful side effects when ice cream is replaces one traditional component of the procedure. So chemotherapy radiation is awful and disgusting and incredibly hard on the body. One of the things that it does, I don't know whether this is in all patients or most patients, but oral mucositis, I mean, just raw mouth, sores in the mouth is a definite side effect of the treatment. They had 74 patients in this study, and in this study, instead of giving them just ice for cryotherapy to soothe their mouth, they gave them 3 doses of ice cream a day, and it had a marked improvement. Only 29% of patients who had the ice cream had the oral sores, compared to 59% who did not get this cryotherapy. So, kind of crazy and fringy, but a definite benefit. In physics, this team from China tried to understand how ducklings manage to swim in formation. They noticed that most ducks, especially mallard ducks, always swim in a straight line, and so they sought to seek, and understand the benefits of ducks and their drafting, basically, and how they learn to reach maturity and follow mom around, basically. A couple more in economics. A team here sought to explain mathematically why success most often goes not to the most talented people, but instead to the luckiest. So
okay, wait a minute, run that by me again.
They sought
Success
to explain.
Goes to the luckiest.
They sought to explain mathematically why success most often goes not to the most talented, but instead to the luckiest. There's this perception that hard work and skill, perseverance will pay off, but part of their conclusion seems to indicate intelligence doesn't have even that much to do with it. It is a bit of luck, a bit of networking, and a bit of being pretty, and that will take you further than anything else. And then one more, the Safety Engineering Prize. This is my favorite one from this batch from last year. Went to a guy named Magnus Gens, who is a 3-time nominee. He developed a moose crash test dummy. So we're in, as the name Magnus might suggest, we're Scandinavian here. The problem in this part of the world is the average moose is like 1,400 pounds. And when a mother moose gives birth, she raises the calf for about a year, and then right around the year mark, kind of kicks the calf out and ditches the calf. So the calf needs to learn to start figuring stuff out on its own. A moose calf is 400 or 500 pounds, but can be 6 or 7 feet off the ground, and its center of gravity obviously is very, very high. So when you hit and they don't know to be afraid of roads. So when you hit one of these things broadside, you basically hit its legs, whereupon the body comes right through the windshield. And so, so he developed a crash test dummy, and Saab. This is actually he was nominated last year. This was for research done back in the 80s, back when Saab still existed. Saab donated the vehicles to test this out on, in order to try to help people to not die so often when they're met face to face with a moose. So anyway, some interesting
Wow.
and sort of silly. I don't know. I love that someone came up with this, and they do this every year. And I wanted to mention this week only because the 2023 awards are this week on Thursday, September 14th. And they are going to be webcast, and I'll put that link in the show notes. So that was just my update from a much earlier episode.
I'm really glad that you started with the scorpions and the enemas and ended with the moose.
Yeah, that seemed
quite frankly.
Mm-hmm.
And have you seen that footage of those assholes messing with the moose? And the moose is like, you know what? Screw you guys. Have you seen that? Look that up. Because there's this guy, the guy filming it, like, don't mess with the moose. It's wild. The guy's like, oh, really? How close can we get to the moose? How close can we get to the moose? Can we get this close? And right when he does that, the moose is like, that's it. I'm taking these guys out. Yeah, it's great. It's great. And I love that phrase, Turons, tourists and morons combined.
Oh, yeah.
You've been messing with the animals all summer. It's just, God, we're so stupid when it comes to wild animals. Anyway.
The random yahoos that go to Yosemite and there's a bison and they get out and want to pet it. Like that, what are you doing? You can be disemboweled by this 1,200 pound animal. It's not a pet. So
isn't ritualized Mayan enema? Aren't they opening for Slipknot this fall?
I think so.
They are.
So anyway, that's not my main story, but that was just something I wanted to drop in here quickly for
that's great
for an update.
So that's our update. Okay.
So the story I had this week, we're going to go back to 1950s and some radio. So we're going to talk a little bit about a guy named Peter Tripp. And 1950s is a time in radio where it starts to get very, very competitive, nationwide. And there starts to be this trend in radio stations and with DJs to come up with as many gimmicks and dares and, frankly, anything you possibly can to get people to tune into your station. And so there are bets, there are attempts at world records, there is DJs setting records for broadcasting out in the bitter cold, broadcasting out in the heat, broadcasting from the top of a flagpole was a trend. Bring listeners in and see, and broadcast how many oysters could a listener eat in 10 minutes? How many drinks could you suck down? And topics got, more and more and more narrow. There was one I saw a radio station in the 50s, a record that stands to this day. The station set a record for the highest number of ice cream sandwiches consumed by two people in 5 minutes. That's incredibly precise, but okay. But they sought to do whatever they could. You might recall years later, 70s and 80s, during the rodeo in San Antonio, KTSA, KTFM would broadcast from, no one outside of San Antonio is going to know this, but there's a huge pair of leather cowboy boots outside North Star Mall. And they had a little broadcast booth that, at the top of these cowboy boots. And so during the rodeo, they would broadcast there, and KSAT Sports would even be there. Again, just anything you can think of that's gimmicky, you can get to encourage folks to tune in. So, the hero of our story this week is this guy, Peter Tripp. He's working in New York as a DJ in the 1950s, and he gets this idea. He wants to boost ratings. He's also going to use this as a fundraising ploy, basically for charity. I mean, he wants to set a new world record, and he chooses as his category sleep deprivation.
Oh no.
And he starts researching it a little bit, talks to a couple researchers and a physician or two, and they're pretty much universally against this idea. They think it's not too smart. But Tripp is determined to proceed, and he's a DJ with WMGM in New York, and starts on a January morning in 1959, and he's on the air in a glass booth in Times Square in New York, and he's set up such that onlookers, tourists, random citizens can walk by and watch him on the air and watch him slowly deteriorate. So first 24 hours, he seems to, he's performing admirably. He's hanging in there, not much to see. After 48 hours, he is leaning on his elbow quite a bit, starting to be sort of visibly droopy. By the end of 3 days, 72 hours in, he would kind of have to shake himself back into coherence just long enough to knock out every stop set. But there are a few just hilarious photos of him where he just looks like a crazy person because he's going slowly insane. And it's sort of the tactics that that I would do sometimes, long distance drive, especially at night when you're starting to drift off, pinching your leg, stomping your feet, running an ice cube down the back of my shirt is something I would do just to sort of spark something because my when the eyelids are getting heavy. But for these first three days, at least on the air, his the experiment is working because it's entertaining, and he's cheerful and he's humorous. He's in a good mood and he's performing, reasonably well. He's able to function for those short bursts of 90 seconds when he has to talk. Day 4 rolls around and the wheels start to come off the bus. By middle part of day 4, he starts suffering, quote, terrifying hallucinations He's imagining spiders crawling in his shoes, mice scampering all over his desk and over him. At times, his psychotic symptoms were so severe that he had a team of doctors here who were monitoring him, and they were unable to test his functioning because he starts to grow hostile. He becomes convinced that the doctors are conspiring against him. He would have these angry outbursts where he would attack them and pull out the little diodes on his body where they were trying to monitor blood pressure or whatever they were doing. By the time they reach the 8th day, Tripp could not differentiate between hallucinations and delusions and reality. He had lost his mind. So he manages to stay awake for 201 hours, which is a little over 8 days. For the last 66 hours of what he called his wake-a-thon, he was taking doses of Ritalin, high doses of Ritalin.
Oh my God.
Just to stay awake, which that seems like that would be cheating. There actually is another DJ in Florida at the same time.
See, you say cheating, and I say horrifically dangerous.
Right. There's another DJ at the same time doing this exact same thing in Florida. The guy in Florida actually manages to go longer. He managed to get to like 225 hours. Tripp stops at 201 hours. But at that moment, he and this other DJ managed to break the current world record at about the same time. And he craters, and he's still in the booth, and they the doctors that are there basically are still monitoring him, put him down in a bed there and let him go to sleep. One account says he sleeps for just 13 hours. Another account, which seems more likely, says he sleeps for 22 hours straight. He then wakes up seemingly fine, and he's recovered from the wake-a-thon experience without any long-term consequences, at least seemingly. But he does sort of continue to have psychotic symptoms well beyond this event. He winds up losing this job. He divorces the woman he's currently married to. He winds up getting married and divorced 3 more times after this. For years and years afterwards, he would say of the event that doctors thought I was Peter Tripp, but I knew I was an imposter. Whatever the hell that means. That's completely bonkers thing to say. And then in the early 60s, he wound up having to leave radio because he was caught in a payola scandal where he was alleged, it was alleged he was paid like $36,000 in payola, pay to play, stuff. And his career in radio was in the tank. So went into sales. The guy in Florida beats his record, just a day later. And then both of their records are beaten 6 years later by a high school student in California named Randy Gardner, who stays up for 11 days. Any idea what the current record is for wakefulness?
I hope it's not more than 11 days. 11 days and 11 days in 1 hour. I have no idea.
I don't have the person's name. It was set in 1986. 453 hours, just over 18 days.
That can't be good.
No. The psychologists have studied Tripp's episode here because he actually had a team of doctors there with him, and what psychologists realized in looking at these results after the fact is that the visual hallucinations that this guy was having during this time were, generally speaking, following a 90-minute cycle, but he's awake. But a 90-minute cycle coincides with how often most people tend to drift in and out of REM sleep.
Right.
And so basically what's happening is when he was hallucinating, he was having dreams while he was awake. And so just all kinds of bad for you. Sleep deprivation. I've done it in college. I did it like crazy. I would stay up all night, get hopped up on caffeine. Happily, at the time, I didn't have a source for anything like Ritalin or Adderall. I'm sure I would have abused it. And because, like drinking water, getting the right amount of sleep is basically makes everything about your body and your brain work better. And then when you don't have these things, they work, so weight loss, cognition, concentration, decision making, emotion regulation, heart rate, digestion, everything works better when you when you get the right amount of sleep. And when you sacrifice that, you are doing very, very bad things to your body. There's a quote here. This is a very common problem in college. I mean, I remember pulling all-nighters like crazy in college, and obviously having tons of friends that do it. And the academic experience now has gotten even more competitive. There's a author and reporter, Riley Griffin, writes, quote, split between the demands of work and play, there is no room for rest. Many students admit that rest feels like failure, a marker of incompetence and underachievement. At college, rest has the greatest stigma of all, unquote. So, there's this notion that sleep is for the weak. And just one other quote from this guy, Matt Walker, who's a PhD. He's a professor of neuroscience and psychology at UC Berkeley. Quote, the evidence is overwhelming. It is irrefutable. Sleep is the single most effective thing you can do to reset your brain and body health each and every day. And it's Walker that wrote a book that I have, or came out in 2017, called Why We Sleep, Unlocking the Power of Sleep and Dreams. It's pretty, it's very academic, but pretty interesting. And I mean, the nuts and bolts of it basically indicate that no one seems to really know why we need to sleep, but it's very, very clear that it's vital. And one of the things in this book that I did several years ago, and I do occasionally just to make sure I'm getting enough sleep, is if you think you're not getting enough sleep, go to bed at an early enough hour and don't set an alarm, and keep track of how long you stay asleep, and do that for like a week. And then if it's like 6.5 hours on average, 7 hours on average, whatever it is, then then you can that's an accurate sort of barometer of whether or not you're getting enough sleep or not. So I do that occasionally just to make sure I'm getting enough, because I spent my entire adult life, most of my adult life, getting about half to 2/3 the sleep I probably needed. And there you have it.
And think about what we do to like medical students.
Oh yeah,
and doctors, just this insane amount of sleep they're expected not to get. How can you possibly function?
Yeah, so work 24 hours straight, and then sleep for 90 minutes in a locker somewhere, or whatever. It's inhumane to make anyone do this crap and expect them to function like a human being.
Yeah, and the last time I did something that long without sleep was when I drove 2 summers ago, maybe last summer, the summer before. I drove from San Antonio back to Denver without sleeping, and that was that's a horrible mistake. I'm too old for that kind of shit.
Yeah, don't do that. Get your sleep. Get some sleep. Drink some water.
Well, I can certainly feel for the DJs. That's something that back in the 50s, I mean, you were changing out basically singles, right? So you're having to change. I mean, was he having to change his own records out? I'm guessing he was. That requires a fair amount of that requires a fair amount of dexterity to be able to do that. And you're having to do that,
right.
Play 3 songs in a row for about 10 minutes and then do a stop set. And I mean, that's,
yeah, I don't know. I don't know how he was, even the least bit coherent. There's a very, very short period of time in San Antonio. I'm not even sure when this was. I'm close to the end of being in college for me, when over the course of like 6 weeks, on a Sunday night, I would do midnight to 2 a.m. at KRTU, and then 2 a.m. to 8 a.m. at KFAN. And because there was drive time between, I would sign up at 2 a.m. I would drive over to KFAN, go on the air whenever I got there at 2:15, stay there until 8 a.m., and then go back to campus and go to class on Monday morning. And I was crazy. I was completely bonkers. And that was just one night with no sleep. Anyway.
No, thank you. No, thank you.
Right. Dangerous and stupid behavior, but funny.
Yeah, funny to everybody else. Well, thanks, Bryan. That was cool. I like the peek back at 1950s DJing too. That's always fascinating little element of I figured he was going to fall prey to payola at some point because a lot of DJs did back then. So
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely.
And speaking of payola,
Hmm.
do you have a curse word of the week for us?
I do indeed. The curse word this week comes to us from Russia. I stumbled across this. I don't have the reference from me, either from Huffington Post or Washington Post. The word is compromat. Kompromat. I had never
Good
seen this
word.
word. Compromat. You've heard this word before?
Yeah, it's information or a situation that you have over someone to use at a future date
Right.
to garner a favor or
Right.
it's
Yeah.
basically compromising information on someone.
Yeah. It's a compromise. It's a compromise in a laundromat. No. Yeah. So in the context of sort of international, in the article I was reading, it was about Donald Trump. I mean, why is it that GOP leaders in Congress now are still with him? It must be that he has a compromat on them because he has information, blah blah blah. But it has a Russian espionage source. But I saw that word like, anyways, someone at Huffington Post wants to use their $5 word today. So I'd never seen that before, and much kind of liked it.
I first heard it on one of the Newsy News podcasts
Yeah.
A while back. Yeah, it's a good word.
Yeah.
And you can say it in compromat. You can really
right. I mean, it looks like it's a Russian word,
right? Looks like, feels like, is like Russian word.
In Russia, laundromat compromises you. Wait, doesn't make any sense.
Bryan, we are going to cover the gamut of culture here today, from enemas to radio DJs to compromat to this. Bryan, can you name a couple of comic book publishers for me?
Comic book, you know that I am not a comic book
I know
guy.
you're not, but can you name a couple? Can you name two, maybe three for me? I bet you can name at least two.
Well, I know DC Comics. Is that one of them?
That's one. Okay, yeah, that's one of the ones.
And then Marvel.
There you go. That's the big two.
And then Action is an Action one.
Action is a title from DC.
Okay.
So good. Yeah, good. You named the big two.
Okay.
I'm going to tell you about another comic book company that if I were to sit down with a comic book historian like our friend Bill Field from San Antonio, if he and I were to get into a conversation, and Bill is a true historian, he's written books and articles, and he runs a panel every year at San Diego Comic-Con in the history of comics. He and I could probably whip out about 20 or 30 comic book publishers in the decades, the almost 90 years of comics. And we would probably get about 20 or 30 deep before we brought up this company. I'm going to tell you a little bit about something called Spire Comics, Spire, because it holds a pretty interesting place in American history, particularly when it comes to comic books.
Okay.
You ever heard of Spire Comics?
No idea.
I'll bet you have, and you'll find out why here in a moment.
Okay.
Here we go with Spire Comics. In the early 1970s, publisher Fleming H. Revell, tell me that's not a great name, Fleming H. Revell wanted a comic book line to complement his current line of books. So he consulted with a guy by the name of Al Hartley, who was a lifelong comics professional. Hartley was born in 1921, and he grew up in New Jersey, the son of Congressman Frederick Allen Hartley Jr. That's a name you're probably familiar with from American history, because along with fellow Republican Senator Robert Taft, Fred Hartley introduced the Labor Management Relations Act of 1947 before the House and the Senate. You might better know this as the Taft-Hartley Act. And this severely curtailed unions' abilities to call for solidarity, wildcat strikes, jurisdictional strikes, and political strikes. It outlawed monetary donations to federal campaigns by unions. It outlawed picketing. It outlawed the closing of shops. It required union organizers to sign non-communist affidavits. So it basically gutted the unions for a lot of things they were used to doing. Truman actually vetoed it, and then his veto was overridden. So that's how big this was.
Scumbags.
A deal, right? It really took some wind out of the union sails. So that was Al Hartley's dad. Al Hartley did not go into politics. He was encouraged by his family to pursue his career following his artistic talents. So he enrolled in the Art Students League of New York, and he found work drawing spot ads and even sold a Western comic book story. He then served in World War II. He went and volunteered before he was drafted. He served in the Army Air Corps as a bomber pilot. So it's not like he went the easy route. I mean, that's,
right.
As we've talked in here before, that's a
Yeah.
That's a rough job.
Yeah, it's a serious gig again.
After the war, he resumed his art career working in commercial art. So he was drawing ads for magazines. And he also worked for some comic book companies such as Standard, Better Publications, Nador Publishing, and American Comics Group. He finally landed a regular job at Timely Comics. And as comic aficionados or geeks like myself know, Timely Comics would become Atlas Comics and finally Marvel Comics. So he worked with Stan Lee at a very early age. He wrote and drew teen girl adventures of characters like Patsy Walker and Hetty for over a decade. And he found this niche in the humor and teen comic genre. So he didn't really work with superheroes. In fact, I think he published one superhero story. And by 1967, Hartley was working on a black and white feature in a men's magazine published by Martin Goodman. This strip was one of the phrases you can describe it was a nudie cutie. Think of it as a TNA R-rated spy parody called Pussycat. So it was kind of the kind of thing that your dad might read in the back of a Playboy or one of those magazines of the time. Showed a little bare boobs, bare butt kind of thing. And he found that he couldn't continue. He was also working for Archie Comics at the time, which was fine, but the adult comics had to go because he had become a born-again Christian that year in 1967. And when Fleming H. Revell called with an offer to work with him in launching Spire Christian Comics, Hartley knew he had found the perfect outlet for his professional talents and personal beliefs. That's right, Bryan. This is about a 1970s Christian comic book company. In their publishing plan, Spire had a number of different genres in an effort to appeal to a variety of Christian readers, looking for stories to reaffirm their faith or perhaps to introduce faith to different kinds of readers. Over the years, Spire only published between 55 to 59 different issues, depending on how you look it up. Some sources say 55, some say 59. I'll go with 59 as a number. But each issue was reprinted multiple times. Between 1972 and 1982, so 11 years, 40 million copies were sold of Spire Christian Comics worldwide, starting at a price of 35 cents up until 79 cents towards the end of their run. That's not too bad for a little bitty, pretty much independent comic company that was attached to a Christian publisher. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to talk about the different genres, and then I'm going to go into a very specific discussion of one of these specific issues. Let's talk about the genres. There were 9 kiddie titles, and I put kiddie in parentheses for the younger readers. Most of these, I think 8 of the 9, featured a character called Barney Bear. Barney Bear was a cub who he wore up overalls for some reason, and he lived in Yellowstone National Park with his parents, and he sees the wonder of God everywhere he looks. The first issue, titled Barney Bear Wakes Up, sees the cub struggle with hibernation. He doesn't want to hibernate as long as his parents tell him to. But in his literal awakening, he becomes attuned to the glory of God's creation. So in every episode, he goes out into the wonders of the park, and he sees God everywhere he looks because it's all God's creation. There were 7 issues that were Bible story adaptations. Now, some of these were set in biblical times, but some were modernized. Like there's a Joseph story where they are clearly wearing bell-bottom leisure suits.
Of course.
Okay? Now, one of these detailed one of my actual favorite stories from the Bible, Saul of Tarsus' transformation to Paul. You recall what happens to Paul? He's riding on the road to Damascus, and he is struck by lightning. And in that moment, he changes from Saul to Paul, right? That's how he becomes Paul. And this has the glorious pop culture title. And this is something that we see in churches today. The title of this is Paul, Close Encounter of the Real Kind.
Okay.
What's that cringy look you just had there, Bryan?
This stuff just makes my skin crawl.
It's a bit like when the X-Men movies were out and there was a church near our buddy Joe's house that said, "We don't need more X-Men, we need more Amen."
Right. Yeah. Kill me. Yeah, I hate this stuff.
There were 7 miscellaneous groupings or other adaptations of Christian books. And I've got to say that you were raised in the church, maybe not this kind of church. I was raised in the Methodist church.
Yeah.
right?
Presbyterian here, so some Methodist adjacent, right?
Right. So, but we're more laid back. There are evangelical Methodists, not like this. But these miscellaneous titles and other adaptations, one of them included an adaptation of Hal Lindsey's There's a New World Coming. Are you familiar with Hal Lindsey? Hal Lindsey was an evangelical writer, and he's actually still alive, and ostensible theologian. Now, he should not be confused with Hal Linden, the actor who portrayed the titular
Barney
character
Miller, right?
of one of the great 70s sitcoms, Barney Miller. Could you imagine Inspector Luger? Barn, have you heard the good word of Jesus? Barn, say, Barn. I cannot be the only person who ever confused Hal Linden with Hal Lindsey. But Hal Lindsey had a bestseller in 1970 called The Late Great Planet Earth. You've probably heard of that title.
Mm-hmm.
It was ghostwritten by Carol C. Carlson, and it compares the biblical and concurrent events of the 70s, 60s, and 70s, attempting to demonstrate that Jesus was returning soon and that the judgment of the world was at hand. In short, this book was a popular culture artifact tapping into eschatology, right? The study of the end of times prophecy that the Bible has for us, particularly in the book of Revelation. The New York Times declared it the best-selling nonfiction book of the 1970s. I went to goodreads.com and found an excellent review by a gentleman named Scott Holstad, who gets my big thumbs up for a great review. It's terrific. He says, utter trash. I still can't believe how this piece of shit swept over America during the 1970s, resulting in millions of dollars, I'm sure, for Lindsay, that asshole, as well as a piece of shit, wildly fantastic, mythological horror show of a movie that was traumatic as shit to kids like me and others I know whose fundy parents forced them to go see it. Bravo, Mr. Holstad.
Yeah, perfect.
Also in this miscellaneous category, were a trio of issues featuring the brothers. These are a pair of siblings named Pete and Tom. They were identical, as far as I can tell, blonde hair, freckled youths of 17 or so, differentiated only by the fact that Pete wore glasses. Now, I went and tracked down 6 issues of Spire Christian Comics to read for this story, Bryan, and one of them did feature the brothers, and this issue was titled Adventure with the Brothers, Cult Escape. In it, these religious Hardy Boy knockoffs tackle a cult that's kidnapping teens and imprisoning them on an island. In a wild story involving gold bars, wild hogs, soldiers vaguely resembling Fidel Castro, and a cool mini-sub, the brothers save the teens and then set sail from Cult Island while reciting a helpful list of signs of a cult. Okay, now they give us 4 ways to differentiate a cult from a religion, specifically a Christian religion. 1, a cult worships its leader instead of Jesus. 2, a cult quotes his leader instead of the Bible. 3, cults only believe part of the Bible. 4, cults use other books for divine truth. Well, by that argument, anything that's not Christianity is de facto a cult with that last one, right?
Yeah, exactly right.
Yeah. And then Tom says, looking directly at the reader, don't believe anyone who talks religion unless they agree with the Bible says about Jesus. And Pete adds, the Bible tells the truth. Jesus is the only way to know God. All right. Now, I would say that avoiding cults is a very good thing. And that list is actually it's a fairly good start to enumerate cult characteristics. Cults have a charismatic leader. Cults tend to want to, what I would argue is, a cult, more importantly than that, a cult tries to cut you off from the world that you know, from your friends, from your family, from your work. They try to cut you off from your means of funds, so you have to rely on them for other things. A cult tries to intrude upon your health by substituting a healthy diet with a diet that's going to make you slow and sluggish, tries to deprive you of sleep, all these other things. Now, perhaps you suspect that the new crowd you're suddenly hanging out with is a cult. Despite this concern, Tom and Pete, in their earnestness, quite frankly, seem like insufferable self-righteous pricks. So there you go, Adventure with the Brothers, Cult Escape. Now another genre. So we've covered the kiddie genre, the Bible adaptations, and then this this miscellaneous group are the autobiographical and biographical sections, issues. There are 13 titles in all. And these feature tales of Christians who expressed or discovered their faith in unique ways. Among the real people included in this batch were your favorite, Johnny Cash, Tom Landry, coach of the Dallas Cowboys,
Right.
and Charles Colson.
Charles Colson. Who's that?
Well, he's that Charles Colson, Bryan. Richard Nixon's Hatchet Man, the first of the Watergate defendants to serve time. And this book came out after he actually went to jail.
Okay.
He became a born-again Christian after the
That's
Watergate
convenient, right?
scandal.
Yeah, right.
But what I want to talk about is something called The Cross and the Switchblade from 1972, which, along with God's Smuggler, also from 1972, were the very first issues published by Spire. Cross and the Switchblade tells the story of David Wilkerson, a Pennsylvania preacher, remember this is a true story, who received the calling to witness to gang youths in New York City of the late 50s and early 60s. Wilkerson leaves his very pregnant wife behind, and with monies collected by the people of his hometown, travels to the big city to spread the good word. Here's examples of some of the dialogue. From the cover, a gang member brandishes a knife in Wilkerson's face. The gang member's name is Nicky, and he says, "I could kill you, preach." And Wilkerson says, "Yes, you could, Nicky. You could cut me up into 1,000 pieces, and every piece will say, 'I love you.'" From page 6, Wilkerson's thinking this in his head, and he observes the conditions of a New York City alleyway. This is New York City at its worst, and if I'm going to raise my sights, I'll have to lower my eyes.
Nauseating.
Wilkerson in the story tries desperately to speak to various groups, particularly the Dragons gang, but has no success. Stonewalled by the police, the media, and the community at large, he visits with a group of homeless youth, some addicted to drugs, and tries to connect with Nicky, the leader of the Mau Mau's. The only help he finds is in a local church. A pastor there takes him in and organizes a, quote, week-long mass rally for all the gangs to meet, where hopefully Wilkerson can preach and convert. The rally coincides with the due date of his first child, but Wilkerson is convinced that he must improve the world his child is born into. His wife, Gwen, agrees, telling him during a phone call that, quote, "Babies have been born without their father's assistance. You do what you have to do, and may God be with you, David." The first rally night is a failure. David is laughed off the stage. He seeks out Nicky to learn more about street life in New York City, where he sees day-to-day problems up close. So he invites Nicky to dinners at the pastor's house, where Nicky is taught to give thanks before the meal. On the second night of the rally, the same result. David is again laughed off the stage, but for some reason, Nicky hangs around to give David grief, asking if he wants a boy or a girl. Mocking David, he says, "God, if you're up there and you love me, give this preacher a boy." Just then, the local pastor receives a phone call from David's hometown. It's Gwen with the joyous news that David is father to a healthy baby boy. Doing all right there?
Yeah, doing great.
Okay. So that night, David thanks God in prayer for his healthy son. He also thanks God for, quote, what's going on inside Nicky right now. Nicky, meanwhile, spends a restless night wondering if his prayer was indeed answered or if it was a matter of mere chance that Gwen gave birth to a boy. Well, odds are about 50-50, maybe a little less that it's going to be a boy. But anyway.
Right.
On the third night of the rally, David begins by taking up the collection. And to everyone's disbelief, he puts the Mau Mau's in charge of the plates. The gang wants to leave with the money, but Nicky stops, noting that, quote, "This is the first time anyone's ever trusted me." He delivers the funds to the stage, and through the course of the evening, accepts Jesus as his savior. He prays on stage with David, calling himself the dirtiest sinner in New York City. To which I say, pump the brakes there, Haas. This is New York City in the late 50s and early 60s.
Yeah.
I am sure there's much worse sinners than you wandering around the streets of New York.
Mm-hmm.
A few days pass, and word on the street is out that Nicky's found religion. He tells David that he wants to be a preacher too. He throws away his, quote, grass, and declares that the cross is mightier than the switchblade. The story originally appeared as a book written by Wilkerson, co-authored with John and Elizabeth Sherrill. I think that's the pastor he stayed with in New York. In 1962, it sold over 50 million copies. A film adaptation in 1970 starred, can you guess who, Brian? Can you guess who starred in the film adaptation of this book?
In what year?
1970. Just guess who played the preacher and Nicky the gang leader, the gang captain. Guess who played the preacher and the gang captain?
De Niro and Pacino. No.
No.
Hal Linden and no. I don't know.
Pat Boone. Pat Boone played
Perry
David
Como?
Orkelson. Nope. And the gang leader was played by a young Eric Estrada.
Yeah, okay.
You're welcome. And I say to that, with his 1970 film, Brian, why bother with other films of the time like MASH, Little Big Man, Patton, Love Story, Kelly's Heroes, Five Easy Pieces, Gimme Shelter, or even Dirty Dingus McGee when you've got The Cross and the Switchblade in the theater? Plus, there's Start the Revolution Without Me, which saw Donald Sutherland delivering the immortal line, "And I shall be queen." Ignore all that and go see Cross and the Switchblade instead. But I digress. Wilkerson spent the 60s through the 80s founding multiple ministries, including the Youth Crusades, CURE, which stands for Collegiate Urban Renewal Effort, and World Challenge. He returned to New York and founded the Times Square Church, still in operation today. He and Gwen had 4 kids and 11 grandchildren and maintained homes in both New York and Texas. By 2009, Wilkerson claimed to have visions of massive world calamity, signs of God's wrath owing to America's, quote, America's sins. Fires would consume much of New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut. He did not give a specific time of this occurrence, only saying it was not far off, to which I say, smart. Don't give a specific time and date. That makes you look like an asshole when the deadline passes.
Right. Yeah, the rapture. Yeah, right.
I don't like to make fun of people's religions and their beliefs, but this is a bunch of hokey horse shit to me. I can't stand this kind of crap. Wilkerson died in an April 27th, 2011 car accident in East Texas. Gwen died the following year from cancer on July 5th, 2012. As of this writing, Nicky Cruz is still alive. After his conversion, he attended Bible college, became a preacher, and returned to his old neighborhood in New York City. He has written 6 books, including 2 autobiographies. So I remember seeing these Spire Comics. When I talked with comic historian Bill Field, he remembers them being sold in Christian bookstores. But I also remember seeing them, like in my church, I remember seeing them in the gift shops of hospitals, particularly the Baptist system, because my dad was a doctor with Baptist Hospital. I remember seeing them at Skaggs Albertsons, if you remember the old Skaggs Albertsons chain in San Antonio. Now, I mentioned some of the other subjects I considered doing for the biography comic. I picked up these back issues relatively cheap for $2 to $3 each, but there was one whose price was well out of my range, Brian, when it comes to the autobiography stuff and the biography stuff. The lowest priced copy of this particular issue was $360.
Holy shit.
The highest topped out at $1,400 because its condition was so good. It's the story of a Czech girl named Maria Hirschman, who during World War II, quote, fell under the Nazi influence. She escaped into West Germany in 1955 and immigrated to the United States, where she became a born-again Christian. She taught schools and wrote a book about her experience titled I Changed Gods. This book sold well, about 400,000 copies under that title. That title was then changed, and it was subsequently published under a different title, and it also was a Spire Christian Comics adaptation. Brian, I sent you an email earlier. Please open it, check out that image, and tell the readers what you're looking at. It's a cover to the comics adaptation of Maria Hirschman's book.
Oh my God.
Yeah, what does that look like to you, Brian? I'm going to look at it too while you're describing it so we can look at it together.
So it says 39 cents at the top, and then Hansi, Hansi, the girl who loved the swastika. So this is Nazi propaganda. Blonde, blue-eyed girl in the foreground, filling frame, but the background is all Nazi Germany with 1, 2, 3, 4, 8 or 10 swastika banners. And
it's not Nazi propaganda. It's not Nazi
Well,
propaganda. It's her.
that's
Yeah,
what
it's
it
her,
looks like, right?
yeah.
But with there very obviously a German village back there as well.
Yeah, and she's blonde haired, blue eyed. It's got
Right.
Al Hartley's signature on there. Hansi, the girl who loved the swastika. It is all about her story of leaving the Third Reich and Nazism behind, escaping to America, discovering Christ, and becoming a born again Christian. It was titled. It was under that title, Hansi, the girl who loved the swastika. Later editions, because you noticed it was 39 cents, so this would be a mid publication date. It was titled under the title Hansi, the girl who left the swastika. Maria,
smart change.
Maria Hirschman later in about 2009 or so, she was actually giving an address down here at Colorado Springs at the Air Force Academy. She was scheduled to do it, but she made some unfavorable comparisons of Obama to Hitler, and was disinvited to speak at the Air Force Academy, and she claims it was misunderstood. That's not quite what she meant. But the thing is, Bryan, is that I'm going to leave it here. There's one more genre I have not discussed yet. This is the end of part one. Part two of Spire Comics will pick up next time. And Al Hartley makes a great business decision, which accounts for, I've got one more genre to talk about, and it accounts for 1/3 of the titles published by Spire Christian Comics. We'll get into that next time, and it gets even wackier. The sources for this are goodreads.com, Scott Holstad's February 8th, 2020 review of The Late Great Planet Earth, consultation with comic book historian Bill Field in San Antonio, Texas, Wikipedia for basic info on Spire and Hal Lindsey and Al Hartley, ChristianComicsInternational.org. And we will continue next week with the concluding chapter, part 2 of Spire Christian Comics.
And I'm tempted to use that, Nazi-laden comic book cover as the artwork for this episode. Though, do we want artwork tied to Dream Idiots with swastikas all over it?
I'm not sure I would. If you use anything, just use the Spire Christian Comics logo. I'm not sure I would use that. The Paul Close Encounters of the Real Kind has got a great shot of a lightning bolt because it's a modernized tale. So instead of striking him, I guess did he ride a donkey to Damascus? I can't remember. Anyway, it's striking a jeep instead of a donkey. The lightning bolt is. So, I remember reading these as a kid, not necessarily the more religious ones, but I do remember. I think I remember reading a Barney Bear when I was very little.
Okay.
And then the other big one that I was going to look at, and I picked up an issue of, was God's Smuggler, which is a true story about a guy named Brother Andrew who would smuggle Bibles into behind the Iron Curtain, which, say what you want, I mean, pretty brave thing to do, really.
Behind the Iron Curtain, behind the Iron Curtain, they were Christian.
Well, I mean, like behind Soviet, behind like, he was trying to get it behind, right? But they weren't allowed in many cases to have Bibles, so he would get it back behind Soviet controlled spaces for people to have, which was, if you were caught smuggling those things, you could get in a lot of trouble.
Right.
I don't know to what extent that was, how historically accurate that issue is. It's not quite like the guy who was like going to the the Sentinelese Islands trying to convert people. They kept saying, "Don't go there because they will shoot you with arrows and kill you."
Right. And that's what happened.
Yeah, and that's exactly what happened. So I did read for this book, for this particular issue, I did read The Adventures with the Brothers, Cult Escape, David Wilkerson's story, Crossing the Switchblade, and I did read God's Smuggler, but I did not use it in the story. And I'll tell you about the other 3 next time. So
that's sweet. So the crazy ass, proselytizing, approach to these comics. The only thing, I read a few comics when I was a kid, but not much, and love Superman, and I seem to recall having some Incredible Hulk at one point, but then at one point was given or had some of the early incredibly simple, I mean, crudely, badly drawn in my mind, Captain America that was just kind of Team America propaganda, because fighting Nazis, and was just America rah 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 stuff, sort of. It could this style reminds me sort of that, in terms of the sort of I don't know, the whole thing just makes me cringe.
It's pretty cringeworthy, and it's going to get worse next week. So
okay.
Buckle
okay,
up.
good.
Yeah,
right.
it's and if there's anybody out there who's read them and is a comic book geek like myself, you know what's coming. So Bryan does not.
Yeah, I know nothing about any of this stuff. Yeah, super interesting stuff.
Well, these were kind of fun to read. The ones I'm going to talk about next week were not
Less fun
at all. Yeah,
okay.
Oh yeah, they were awful.
Okay. Well, I should come up with something like, have a couple topics in the queue for next week. I'll find one that's nice and light, so it's not too heavy.
Well, I don't know why this is a topic that just occurred to me. This is one that should have been done earlier in the series, because this is something that's been under my craw for years with these things. I came across one and was like, holy shit, why haven't I done an episode on this? And then when I really got into it, it's like, oh, it's going to be more than one episode.
Right.
Gotta be. So
yeah, very cool.
All right.
Well, thanks.
Thank you, sir.
All right, another one in the books. Thanks for listening. Please grab this episode on Spotify or Apple or Amazon or wherever you're listening, and share it, like us, shoot us 5 stars, give us a review if you don't mind. You can reach out to us, dreamidiotspodcast@gmail.com. You can go to dreamidiots.com. We have merch there. Check us out, Facebook, Instagram, etc. Stay in touch. Drop us a note. Tell us what you like, what you don't like. It's always cool to hear from folks.
Yes, sir. Read good comics. Be good to each other.
This is a Rough Tiger production.
Bong bong. Bryan.
Bong bong?
Bong bong.
Bong bong. Good.